Hello, I'm Jim Brown. I've been messing about in multi-hull vessels since the 1950s, but in the early 90s I sort of came out of retirement and designed two little trimarans. They call them Wind Riders. I'm pretty proud of them. They've made a lot of people happy, and in the last 10 years or so I've had a chance to gather some images. I have a video hobby, and I've also had some thoughts about the boats, and I'd like to share those with you now. Let's go for a wind ride in several different places. We'll begin on the West Coast. Here we go. Well, for me, the story really begins here in the little town of Sausalito, California. In San Francisco Bay, it's tucked just inside the Golden Gate. This is Sausalito's famous houseboat community at Waldo Point. Some call it an ultra-yuppified slum because the units sometimes sell for as much as $1 million, and they're still the cheapest places to live in town, so Sausalito has gone seriously uphill. Especially since I lived there at Waldo Point in that little houseboat where X marks the spot, and all I ever wanted to do was ride a motorcycle and work in a boat factory and live on a houseboat and sail my little Piver trimaran in the Golden Gate. This is the 16-foot Piver designed Frolic, which I think of as being the first modern trimaran that was really successful. 1957. But let's jump ahead now, 45 years or so, to 2001, and we're back in the Golden Gate in 16-foot trimarans. These are the little Wind Rider trimarans. And this is also the water where the original trimarans were developed. And I was there in my 20s, and it was great to get back in this water with the Wind Rider 16s. We sailed out against a roaring tide and then had a chance to surf back in on gentle rollers and a nice breeze. It was wonderful sailing. And of course, it gave us big ideas. We went scudding back to Sausalito, and promptly loaded up and headed down to Monterey, California. Notice that we've got two Wind Rider 16s on one trailer here. It's pretty easy to do. And we launched on the beach in Monterey. And went out to just dance around the harbor for a while. This is my old friend Joe Hudson. Joe and I have been messing about in multi-hulls together and separately for many years, usually in larger cruising trimarans that I designed and that we built ourselves, and we took off in them, sailed away to foreign waters, sometimes for years at a time with our families and friends as crew. Monterey Harbor is absolutely overrun with sea lions. They're quite a problem. Joe and I have talked about the difference between real seafaring and sailing in these little boats, and there's some real differences, all right. But we've come to believe that we've never really had so much fun sailing as since we got these little wind riders. The trouble with them is that they're little boats that give you big ideas, so we took them down to Stillwater Cove, Carmel, California, at Pebble Beach, and launched there because where we really wanted to go was down into that fog bank, down the coast of Big Sur, 50 miles with no harbors, a very rugged coast. We knew about Big Sur because we'd both lived there. Joe has always lived there, and I did back in the early 60s. That's how we got to know each other. And we've used Joe's place up on his mountain for planning various expeditions over the years. And we had been up and down the Big Sur coast in larger vessels several times, but we always wanted to sail the coast in little boats so we could prowl up into the coves and crags. Looking down from Joe's place on a foggy morning, you can see that the place has some enchanting vistas, and it's located on what really is the steepest coastal slope in the contiguous 48 states. And it would be a great place to sail if you could get in close, but we figured that the 16s were just not quite enough boat for it. So let's fly to the East Coast now and see what's going on in Florida. This is the first annual Wind Rider Adventure Cruise from Miami to Key West. There was a lot of camaraderie in this group. We got about 20 boats together, and sometimes we slept on the beach and sometimes we stayed in resorts, crashing 8 to a room. But it was altogether really a great go. But up in North Carolina at that time, this is what was happening. The cast aluminum mold for the Wind Rider 17. They pour in a measured amount of plastic, powder, and then close up the mold and put it in this oven and test it for rotation. Close the big door and turn on the heat. And the mold gets hot inside the oven and rotates. The plastic melts and the mold rotates through a puddle of molten polyethylene inside the mold while the oven itself rocks from end to end, rock and roll molding. And the plastic coats the inner face of the mold. Now they put it over a bank of cooling fans to cool it off and open the clamshell, and out pops the first main hull for the Wind Rider 17. Now we got a boat under us. Here's a scene on the outer banks of North Carolina that reminded me of the Hobie Cat craze in the 1960s. You were talking about loving your boat.
Yeah, it's just the easiest boat to sail.
Starting a race in light airs and finishing in a spanking breeze.
And the rig seems so strong. It doesn't do any snapping or bending. It just stays there.
But they're pushing it pretty hard here. Actually, Sail Magazine reviewed this boat and called it practically impossible to capsize, which doesn't mean it can't be done.
I never had it out in anything that I felt that I was in any kind of trouble whatsoever.
At least she's not likely to nosedive like